The emergency alarms blared throughout the Coalition High Command Station. The harsh sound made several junior officers jump. Admiral Day One remained perfectly still, only the subtle rippling of his blue-gray scales revealing his tension as he stared at the holographic projection floating before him. "Confirm sensor readings," he ordered, his four-fingered hand gripping the command rail tightly. Lieutenant Hannah looked up from her console, her violet eyes wide with disbelief. Unlike the Admiral, she lacked the decades of discipline that kept emotions in check during crisis situations. "Confirmed, sir. Unknown vessel at coordinates 227 to 89,104, approximately 1.2 kilometers in length. Power signatures exceed anything in our database by at least 3 orders of magnitude." The bridge fell silent. Something this powerful had never been detected in Coalition space. The tactical display showed the massive ship holding position at the edge of the Veil Nebula, just inside Coalition territory. "How did it get past our detection grid?" Dad One demanded. Senior Officer Quan scrolled through data streams at his station. "That's the problem, sir. No transit signature detected. No warp bubble collapse. No quantum displacement. It simply appeared." Day One's inner eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of extreme stress in his species. In 30 cycles of service, he had never encountered a vessel that could bypass all known forms of detection. "Weapons status?" he asked. "Unknown," replied Quan. "Our scans can't penetrate their hull shielding. But, sir, they've made no aggressive movements. They're just sitting there." Day One considered his options. Coalition protocol for unknown vessels was clear. Establish a defensive perimeter, signal for reinforcements, and approach with caution. But something about this situation felt different. "Open communications," Day One said finally. The main view screen flickered for a moment before resolving into the image of a command center. It was unlike any Day One had seen before. Functional rather than impressive, with unusual geometric patterns integrated into its design. In the center stood a being Day One recognized from xenobiology briefings. Hairless, with smooth skin and bilateral symmetry. A mammalian species. Behind it stood others of its kind, all wearing dark uniforms with simple geometric insignia. "This is Captain Jin Ho of the human spaceship Retribution. We come seeking diplomatic relations with the coalition of allied worlds." Day One felt his secondary heart skip a beat. Humans? The primitive mammals from the isolated spiral arm. How had they developed such technology? Coalition surveys had categorized them as pre-spacefaring less than 30 cycles ago. "I am Admiral Day One of the Coalition Defense Force. Your presence is unexpected. Our records indicate your species has not yet developed interstellar travel capabilities." The human's face formed what Day One recognized as a smile, though it lacked the teeth-baring aggression that such expressions indicated in other species. "Your records are outdated, Admiral. We achieved faster-than-light travel 15 years ago. We've been exploring quietly since then." 15 years. Day One struggled to process this information. Most species took centuries to move from initial space travel to FTL capabilities. Even the Talon, the most technologically advanced species in the Coalition, had required 80 years. "We will not tolerate aggression," the human continued, the smile fading. "But we are eager to establish peaceful relations. We bring greetings from Earth and its colonies." Colonies. They had already expanded beyond their homeworld. "We request a formal diplomatic meeting," Captain Jinho said. "We have much to discuss." Day One straightened his posture, his training taking over. "I will relay your request to the Coalition Council. In the meantime, please maintain your current position. Any movement toward Coalition worlds will be considered hostile." The human captain nodded. "Understood, Admiral. We will wait for your response. Retribution out." As the transmission ended, the bridge erupted into hurried conversations. Day One raised a hand, and silence immediately fell again. "Send all data to Coalition Intelligence," he ordered. "Priority 1 encryption. and get me a direct line to the Council. His second-in-command, Commander Ba, approached with a worried expression. Sir, what do we know about these humans? Day 1 accessed his command console, pulling up the sparse coalition records on humanity. Very little. Standard carbon-based life forms. Short-lived by our standards. Average lifespan under 100 cycles. Technological development classified as erratic but promising. Last survey vessel passed their system 30 cycles ago and reported they had just achieved crude orbital capabilities. They were deemed at least 2 centuries away from developing interstellar travel. Could the survey have been wrong? Bai asked. Impossible, Dai-1 said firmly. Coalition surveys are thorough. Something accelerated their development dramatically. He studied the image of the human vessel still displayed on the tactical screen. Its design was unlike anything in Coalition databases, elegant yet functional, with none of the ceremonial elements that most species incorporated into their first interstellar vessels. Notify the Council immediately, Dai-1 said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The sector is about to change forever. Within hours, the Coalition response fleet arrived, 20 warships forming a containment perimeter around the human vessel. Admiral Day-1 transferred his flag to the dreadnought Celestial Harmony, the most powerful ship in the Coalition's third fleet. From his new command center, he observed the human ship with growing unease. It made no threatening moves, initiated no scans of the Coalition vessels, and maintained an open communications channel as requested. Its very passivity was somehow more unsettling than aggression would have been. Admiral, Commander Bay reported, we're receiving a transmission from Coalition Central. The Council has convened an emergency session. The main view screen changed to show the Council chamber on Taylor Prime. 9 Council members, representing the founding species of the Coalition, sat in a semicircle. At their center was High Counselor Maiju, her crystalline form glittering under the chamber lights. Admiral Day-1, she began without preamble. We have reviewed your report. Are you certain these beings identify themselves as humans? Yes, High Counselor. They match all biological markers in our database for the species from Sol 3. Maiju's crystalline structure dimmed slightly, a sign of deep concern among her kind. This is most troubling. The verification protocol must be initiated immediately. The verification protocol. Dai-1 had never expected to use it in his lifetime. It was a relic from the early days of the Coalition, when species sometimes attempted to impersonate others to gain technological advantages. Understood, High Counselor. I will proceed as directed. After the transmission ended, Dai-1 turned to his staff. Prepare a shuttle. I will lead the verification team personally. Commander Ba looked alarmed. Sir, regulations require. I know what regulations require, Dai-1 interrupted. But these are not normal circumstances. If these truly are humans, with technology that's sophisticated, we need to understand how it happened. 4 hours later, Admiral Day-1's shuttle approached the human vessel. Up close, the ship was even more impressive. Its hull constructed of materials unknown to Coalition science, with strange patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. We're receiving docking instructions, reported the pilot. Day-1 nodded. Proceed. As the shuttle docked with the massive human ship, Day-1 prepared himself for what might be the most important first contact in Coalition history. If humans had somehow leaped centuries ahead in their technological development, the balance of power in the sector would never be the same. The airlock cycled, and the door slid open. Captain Jin-Ho stood waiting, flanked by 2 officers. In person, the humans seemed smaller than Day-1 had expected, yet there was something in their posture that conveyed absolute confidence. Welcome aboard the Retribution, Admiral, Jin-Ho said with a slight bow. We have much to discuss about the future of our species in this sector. Day-1 returned the gesture, his inner eyelids flickering with anticipation and concern. Indeed we do, Captain. Indeed we do. The neutral station Vega 7 hummed with activity. The grand chamber, with its high transparent ceiling showing the swirl of nebula gases outside, had been prepared for this historic meeting. Delegates from all 12 species of the coalition occupied their traditional positions around the curved table. Security personnel lined the walls, their expressions tense. Ambassador Su Min adjusted her translator earpiece, watching the human delegation with cautious eyes. As the coalition's chief diplomatic officer, she had participated in 17 first contact scenarios. None had made her as uneasy as this one. "Their technology makes no sense," whispered Tai Ho, the coalition's chief scientist, leaning close to her. His whiskers twitched with excitement, despite his obvious concern. "They've somehow bypassed quantum limitations we've been working on for centuries. Their computer systems operate on principles I can't even begin to comprehend." Su Min nodded slightly, keeping her face neutral. The 5 humans sat across from them, seeming remarkably calm for a species making its first official contact with a galactic coalition. They wore simple dark uniforms with blue trim, each bearing a small patch showing their planet, a blue-green world with swirling white clouds. "The delegation from Earth may present their introduction," announced the council mediator, his voice amplified through the chamber. The human ambassador, a female called Jia Young, stepped forward. Unlike the others, she wore a more formal outfit in deep red. Her voice carried easily across the chamber without technological assistance. "Esteemed representatives of the coalition," she began, her words flowing smoothly through the translation system. "We come in peace, seeking understanding and cooperation. However, we also come seeking answers." Jia Young paused, her dark eyes scanning the assembled delegates. 20 Earth years ago, our colony on Mars was attacked by raiders. 3,000 humans died in that unprovoked assault. The chamber fell silent. Even the ever-present hum of the station's life support systems seemed to fade away. "We had just begun our journey to the stars," Jia Young continued. "Mars was our first colony beyond Earth. We were defenseless. The attack was brutal and efficient." She pressed a small device on her wrist. A hologram appeared in the center of the chamber, showing vessels of unfamiliar design firing upon dome-like structures on a red planet. The images were crude by coalition standards, but the destruction they showed was unmistakable. "We have sought answers ever since," Jia Young said, her voice hardening. "This attack prompted us to accelerate our technological development. We had to protect ourselves from a universe that had proven hostile." A murmur ran through the coalition delegates. Ambassador Su Min exchanged concerned glances with High Commander Dong Yun, the military representative. No authorized military action had been recorded in that sector. The coalition strictly regulated contact with pre-spacefaring species. "These ship designs," Su Min said carefully, rising to her feet, "are unfamiliar to us. The coalition does not authorize aggressive actions against developing worlds." The human delegation exchanged glances, their expressions skeptical. "Perhaps not officially," Jia Young replied. "But someone with advanced technology attacked us. We traced their departure vector to this sector." From the back of the chamber, a voice called out. Representative Wu Jin of the Stellar Periphery World stood abruptly, his 4 arms gesturing for attention. As a member of one of the coalition's newest species, he rarely spoke at full council gatherings. "They are familiar to us," Wu Jin said, his translator struggling with his agitated tone. "Those who attack your world have raided our borders for decades. The council has ignored our pleas for assistance, dismissing our reports as exaggerations." The chamber erupted in confusion. Council leader Min banged his ceremonial staff for order. "Representative Wu Jin," Min said sternly, "this is not the appropriate time." "When is the appropriate time?" Zhu Young interrupted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "When another species is decimated, when another colony is destroyed." She stepped closer to the central table, ignoring the security officers who tensed at her movement. "We did not come here to assign blame," Jia Young continued, her tone more measured. "We came for answers." But it seems we are not the only victims of these raiders. The human ambassador turned toward Wu Jin. How long has your government been reporting these attacks? 43 standard cycles. Wu Jin replied. Always at our outermost colonies. Always precise strikes that leave little evidence. Jia Young's expression hardened. Then perhaps we should discuss why the coalition has allowed pirates to operate within its jurisdiction for over 4 decades. Council leader Min rose to his full height, his ceremonial robes shimmering in the artificial light. Ambassador Jia Young, these are serious accusations. The coalition does not permit piracy or unauthorized military action. Yet it has happened, Jia Young replied evenly. Both to us and to your own member worlds. Before Su Min could intervene, her comm unit buzzed with an urgent message. The text flashed across her discreet wrist display. Priority alert. Coalition Hardy Lion yours planning operation against human vessel. Captain Jin and Loda. Risk. Su Min felt her blood freeze. She glanced toward High Commander Dong Hyun, who showed no reaction. Was he involved? Or uninformed like her? The diplomatic crisis unfolding in the chamber was about to become much worse. If hardliners within the coalition military were planning to disable the human vessel while its captain attended the talks, it would confirm everything the humans suspected about coalition duplicity. She needed to act quickly. Su Min rose to her feet, signaling for acknowledgement. Council leader, I request a brief recess to consult with my staff on new information relevant to these discussions. Min looked irritated at the interruption, but nodded. We will recess for 30 minutes. As the delegates began to disperse, Su Min approached Jia Young. The human ambassador watched her approach with wary eyes. Ambassador Jia Young, might I speak with you privately? Su Min asked, keeping her voice steady. Jia Young nodded after a moment's hesitation. Of course. Su Min led her to a small meeting room adjacent to the main chamber. Once the doors sealed behind them, she deactivated her comm unit and removed her translator earpiece. What I'm about to tell you is not officially sanctioned, Su Min said, speaking directly in the human trade language her staff had learned in preparation for these talks. I believe your captain and your ship may be in danger. Jia Young's expression remained neutral, but her posture stiffened. Explain. I've received intelligence that hardliners within our military are planning some type of operation against your vessel. I don't know the details, but I believe the threat is imminent. The human ambassador studied Su Min's face for several long seconds. Why are you telling me this? Why not let it happen? Because I believe in the principles the coalition claims to uphold, Su Min replied firmly. And because if what Representative Wu Jin says is true, then something is very wrong within our organization. Jia Young's hand moved to a device on her wrist. You realize I must warn my ship. I expected nothing less, Su Min said. But I ask that you allow me time to investigate, to find out who is behind this and why. The human ambassador activated her communications device. Jia Young to retribution. Security Protocol Alpha 9. Acknowledge. A calm male voice responded immediately. Retribution acknowledges. Protocol Alpha 9 initiated. Jia Young looked back at Su Min. We've been expecting something like this. Your hardliners will find the retribution is not as vulnerable as they believe. I hope there will be no casualties, Su Min said, concern evident in her voice. That depends entirely on how aggressive your people choose to be, Jia Young replied. We came seeking peace, but we prepared for war. Back in the main chamber, the diplomatic talks resumed with renewed tension. Every delegate could sense something had changed. The humans were more alert, their responses more clipped. Representative Wu Jin had been joined by delegates from 2 other peripheral worlds, all sharing stories of mysterious attacks that had been dismissed by coalition central authorities. As the testimony continued, Su Min's private channel buzzed again. The message was brief. Operation underway. Human vessel targeted by 3 TELT ships. Almost simultaneously, Council Leader Min received a communication that made his facial scales pale visibly. He conferred hurriedly with his staff. "This meeting is temporarily adjourned," he announced abruptly. "All delegates will remain on the station until further notice." As the chamber erupted in confused conversations, Jia caught Su Min's eye across the room. The human ambassador's expression was clear. Whatever happens next, everything has changed. Captain Jin Ho stood on the command deck of the Retribution, his posture relaxed despite the tension among his crew. The warning from Ambassador Jia had arrived just moments ago, giving them barely enough time to prepare. Now 3 coalition stealth vessels were approaching, their cloaking technology almost, but not quite, hiding them from the Retribution's advanced sensors. "Shall I bring weapons systems online, Captain?" asked Lieutenant Du Yun, her fingers hovering over her console. Jin Ho shook his head. "Defensive systems only. No casualties. We're here for diplomacy, not war." "They don't seem to share that view, sir," Du Yun replied, gesturing toward the tactical display where the stealth ships were now visible, moving into attack formation. Jin Ho smiled slightly. Perhaps they need a demonstration of why diplomacy would be the wiser choice. The first coalition vessel fired a targeting laser, preparing to launch boarding pods toward the Retribution's docking bay. The human crew remained calm, continuing their duties as if nothing unusual was happening. "Defensive Protocol Echo 7, Jin Ho ordered quietly. "Containment fields only." "Echo 7 confirmed," responded Commander Yujin, the ship's defense officer. A soft blue glow spread across the Retribution's hull, barely visible against the backdrop of stars. The coalition boarding pods, sleek and predatory, launched from their motherships and accelerated toward the human vessel. "Impact in 5 seconds, Yujin reported. 3, 2, 1. The pods never made contact. Instead, they slowed and then stopped completely, caught in an invisible field 10 meters from the Retribution's hull. Inside each pod, Coalition Special Forces soldiers found their systems suddenly offline. No weapons, no communications, no propulsion. "Extend the field to the stealth vessels," Jin Ho ordered. "Let's make sure our point is clear." The blue glow pulsed once, then expanded outward like a ripple in a pond. As it passed over each coalition ship, their running lights flickered and died. All 3 vessels went dark, drifting powerless in space. On the Lid coalition vessel, Commander Sang-hyuk stared in disbelief at his dead control panels. Emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow across the bridge. "What happened?" he demanded. "Report." His tactical officer shook his head in confusion. "Unknown, sir. Some kind of energy field washed over us. All systems are non-responsive. Weapons, propulsion, communications. Even life support is running on emergency power." Sang-hyuk moved to the viewport, staring at the human ship that hung in space before them. It appeared completely unchanged, its running lights steady, no weapons ports open. "The human ship isn't even at combat status," he reported into his emergency recorder, his voice betraying his shock. "They neutralized 3 stealth attack vessels without firing a single weapon." Back on the Retribution, Jin Ho opened a channel to the disabled coalition ships. "This is Captain Jin Ho of the HSS Retribution. Your vessels have been temporarily disabled to prevent hostilities. No permanent damage has been done to your ships or crew. We will restore minimal power to your life support systems to ensure your safety while we resolve this diplomatic situation." He nodded to Yujin, who pressed a sequence on her console. The red emergency lights on the coalition vessels brightened slightly as minimal power was restored. "I suggest you use this time to reconsider your approach to first contact scenarios," Jin Ho continued. "We came in peace. We still desire peace, but we will defend ourselves if necessary." He closed the channel and turned to his communications officer. "Send a full report to Ambassador Jaidong. Let her know the situation has been contained without casualties." The young officer nodded, then frowned at his display. "Sir, I'm detecting unusual activity across coalition networks. It appears someone is accessing their secure military channels. Jin-Ho's expression darkened. Is it our systems? No, sir. This isn't our doing. It appears to be coming from within the Coalition network itself. Across 3 star systems, Coalition military commanders watched in horror as their secure networks began experiencing inexplicable failures. On Coalition Prime, classified data appeared on public news channels. On the military base at Taros II, defense grids went offline only to restart minutes later. On the border outpost Sentinel-7, automated weapons systems targeted their own installation before emergency protocols shut them down. Admiral Day 1 stood in the Coalition High Command Emergency Center, surrounded by flickering displays and panicked staff. Reports flooded in from dozens of installations, all reporting similar breaches. How is this happening? He demanded, turning to his chief of cybersecurity. Are the humans responsible? The security chief, a member of the highly logical Talon species, shook his head. The attack patterns are inconsistent with external intrusion. These breaches are originating from within our own systems, using high-level access codes. Day 1 stared at the chaos displayed on the monitors before him. Their cyber warfare capabilities exceed their physical technology. How is this possible? Admiral, called an intelligence officer from across the room. You need to see this immediately. The officer transferred data to Day 1's personal tablet. As the Admiral reviewed the information, his facial scales paled to a light gray, a sign of extreme distress in his species. Verify this, he ordered, his voice barely audible over the commotion in the command center. Already verified, sir. Triple sourced. The data showed evidence of a secret faction operating within the Coalition's own ranks. They called themselves the Hegemony, led by General Jun-Ho of the Inner Core Defense Command. For decades, they had been conducting unauthorized operations, including raiding developing worlds for resources and technology. Worst of all, the raids perfectly matched the attack pattern described by the humans, including the assault on their Mars colony 20 years ago. The humans aren't just responding to our aggression, Day 1 realized, sitting heavily in his command chair. They're systematically dismantling the hegemony's operations throughout the sector. Even as he spoke, reports began arriving from 6 different worlds. Hegemony outposts, officially designated as research stations or monitoring facilities, had gone dark as the retribution appeared in orbit above each planet in rapid succession. How are they moving so quickly? Asked Commander Bai, watching the reports with disbelief. No ship can traverse those distances in such short time frames. Day 1 had no answer. The human vessel seemed to defy the laws of physics as the Coalition understood them. On New Titan, a hegemony weapons research facility found itself surrounded by small, unmanned drones launched from the retribution. Before the facility commander could order a response, all communications and weapons systems went offline. Similar scenarios played out on 5 other worlds within a 12-hour period. In his private command bunker deep beneath the capital city, General Jun-Ho watched his carefully constructed network collapse. Decades of secret operations, hidden from Coalition oversight, exposed in less than a day. His communications officer approached nervously. Sir, we've received a direct transmission from the human vessel. It's addressed specifically to you. Jun-Ho hesitated, then nodded. Put it through. The screen before him activated, showing Captain Jin-Ho's face. The human's expression was calm but resolute. General Jun-Ho, my name is Captain Jin-Ho of Earth. 20 years ago, your forces attacked our Mars colony, killing 3,000 civilians. That was your first mistake. Your second mistake was assuming we would remain primitive and vulnerable. The human captain leaned slightly closer to the camera. We have identified and neutralized 67% of your illegal operations throughout this sector. The remainder will be located within the next 48 hours. Jun-Ho found his voice. This is Coalition territory. You have no jurisdiction here. We're not claiming jurisdiction. Jin-Ho replied evenly. We're delivering justice. The Coalition Council has been provided with all evidence of your crimes against both developing worlds and Coalition member species. Your own people will determine your fate. The general's hands clenched into fists. You think you understand this sector, this galaxy. There are forces at work beyond your comprehension, human. For the first time, Jinho smiled. Perhaps, but we understand one thing perfectly. Actions have consequences. Yours have finally caught up with you. The transmission ended, leaving Junho staring at a blank screen as alarms began to sound throughout his bunker. Coalition security forces had arrived, led by Admiral Daewon himself. On the diplomatic station Vega 7, Ambassador Jai Young sat across from a shaken council leader Min. The evidence of the hegemony's activities was displayed between them. Decades of unauthorized raids, weapons development, and resource theft. We did not know, Min said quietly. You must believe that the council did not sanction these actions. Jai Young's expression remained neutral. Perhaps not. But you created a system where such actions could occur undetected for decades. That responsibility cannot be ignored. Min nodded slowly. What do your people want, Ambassador? Reparations. Justice, Jai Young replied simply, and assurance that such actions will never be permitted again, against any species. As they spoke, the retribution continued its systematic dismantling of the hegemony's hidden empire, revealing a cancer that had grown within the coalition for generations. With each new discovery, more coalition officials came forward with information, eager to distance themselves from the conspiracy. The sector was changing, just as Admiral Daewon had predicted, but not in the way anyone had expected. The grand auditorium of the Coalition War College was filled beyond capacity. Officers from all 12 species crowded the aisles and stood along the walls. The emergency symposium on human military capabilities had been announced just hours ago, yet no one with proper clearance would miss it. Military theorist Yunji stood on the central platform, her slender frame dwarfed by the massive display screen behind her. As the Coalition's leading expert on emerging tactical doctrines, she had spent the last 3 days analyzing every scrap of data on human military actions. I appreciate the urgency that brings us together, she began, her voice calm despite the tension in the room. The emergence of human military capabilities represents the most significant shift in sector dynamics since the formation wars. The display behind her showed footage of the disabled Coalition vessels, drifting helplessly near the human ship Retribution. Humans don't fight like us, she explained, advancing to the next slide showing comparative tactical models. This fundamental difference is why our initial assessments were so flawed. Where we seek technological advantage, they create adaptive strategies. Where we build bigger weapons, they develop unexpected countermeasures. Admiral Yu leaned forward in his seat. Are you suggesting they are more advanced than the Coalition? Not exactly, Yunji replied. In many areas, their technology appears less sophisticated than ours, but their approach is fundamentally different. Consider their response to the unauthorized boarding attempt. The display showed a detailed analysis of the containment field that had disabled the Coalition vessels. They could have destroyed those ships. Instead, they temporarily disabled them using minimal energy expenditure. No casualties, no permanent damage. Commander Sang-hyuk, who had led the failed operation, spoke up from the third row. It was humiliating. They treated us like children playing with dangerous toys. Yunji nodded. Precisely. And that reveals another aspect of human tactical thinking. They consider psychological impact alongside physical effectiveness. She advanced to another slide showing analysis of the cyber attacks that had exposed the hegemony. Note how they didn't simply release all the intelligence they gathered. They released it strategically, causing maximum disruption to hegemony operations while minimizing collateral damage to legitimate coalition functions. The room had grown very quiet as the implications sank in. These weren't the actions of a newly spacefaring species. This was the work of a civilization that understood warfare on a level that made many in the room uncomfortable. Their historical records, which they shared quite openly, Show a species that has engaged in constant warfare throughout their development, Yunji continued. Not because they are inherently aggressive, but because their homeworld contained numerous competing factions. They've had thousands of years to perfect the art of conflict. A young tactical officer raised his hand. But their technological development doesn't match that timeline. How did they advance so quickly? Necessity, Yunji said simply. After the hegemony attack on their Mars colony, they dedicated enormous resources to defensive capabilities. But more importantly, they approached the problem differently than we would have. She was about to elaborate when her communication device buzzed urgently. The same alert sounded on dozens of devices throughout the auditorium. High-ranking officers immediately checked their secure channels, their expressions growing alarmed. Yunji quickly scanned the incoming data, her professional composure cracking for the first time. "We need to end this session," she announced. "General Junho has broken containment. The hegemony fleet has launched a desperate assault against Earth itself." The auditorium erupted in chaos as officers rushed to their duty stations. Yunji remained on the platform, quickly downloading the tactical data streaming in from coalition monitoring outposts near the Sol system. General Junho had escaped custody during transfer, fleeing to a hidden base where loyal hegemony forces had gathered. With his network exposed and his operations dismantled, he had chosen a final desperate gambit, a direct attack on the human homeworld. In the Coalition Strategic Monitoring Center, Admiral Day 1 watched with growing horror as the hegemony fleet, 15 warships that had been listed as decommissioned in official records, approached the Sol system. "This is madness," he whispered. "They'll provoke a full-scale war." "Maybe that's what Junho wants," Commander Ba suggested. "If humans retaliate against the hegemony fleet, he can claim they're a threat to the entire coalition." Day 1 shook his head. "We must warn them. Open a channel to the retribution." The communications officer looked up with confusion. "Sir, the retribution is no longer at Vega 7. It disappeared from our sensors 6 hours ago." "Find it," Day 1 ordered, "and get me any human representative you can reach." When General Junho's fleet reached the outskirts of the Sol system, they expected to find a vulnerable homeworld with perhaps a few defensive installations. Earth was, after all, new to interstellar travel. The retribution had been an anomaly, a single advanced vessel that had caught them by surprise. What they found instead made even the hardened hegemony veterans pause. "General," the tactical officer reported, his voice strained, "we're detecting multiple defensive platforms throughout the system, and ships, dozens of warships emerging from concealed positions near the gas giants." Junho stared at the tactical display with disbelief. Where had these forces come from? How had the humans built such a fleet in secret? The retribution was never their flagship, Yunji realized with shock as she watched the data feed in the War College. It was merely a diplomatic vessel. On the hegemony command ship, General Junho refused to retreat. "Press the attack," he ordered. "Target their homeworld. They cannot possibly defend against our entire fleet." The hegemony warships accelerated toward the inner system, weapons charging. The human vessels moved to intercept, forming a defensive screen around Earth and its moon. The battle lasted less than an hour. In the Coalition Strategic Monitoring Center, officers watched in stunned silence as the hegemony fleet was systematically dismantled by weapons that Coalition scientists had deemed theoretical at best. "They're using gravitational lensing as a weapon," whispered Taiho as he watched the footage, "and some form of controlled singularity technology." One by one, the hegemony ships were disabled, not destroyed, but rendered completely inoperable. Only General Junho's command vessel continued to fight, launching a desperate barrage toward Earth itself. The missiles never reached their target. A familiar ship, the Retribution, appeared directly in their path, emerging from what appeared to be a localized distortion in space. A pulse of energy expanded from the human vessel, and the missiles simply dissolved. "That's impossible," Taiho muttered. Matter cannot be converted to energy that efficiently without. He fell silent as the implications became clear. The humans possessed energy conversion technology far beyond Coalition understanding. The retribution then approached Junho's crippled command ship. Rather than destroying it, they simply disabled its propulsion and weapons systems, then departed, leaving the vessel adrift. Within minutes, a Coalition peacekeeping fleet arrived, having been secretly dispatched by Admiral Daewon when the Hegemony fleet first mobilized. This could have been much worse, the Admiral said quietly as he watched the human fleet return to defensive positions around their homeworld. They could have destroyed those ships. They could have interpreted this as an act of war by the entire Coalition. Why didn't they? Asked Commander Ba. Because they understand something that General Junho never did, Yunji said, having joined them in the monitoring center. The difference between justice and vengeance. 2 days later, the Coalition Council convened an emergency session. Ambassador Zhe Young represented Earth, standing calmly before the assembled delegates. The actions of General Junho and his hegemony do not represent the Coalition as a whole, Council Leader Min stated formally. We extend our deepest apologies for the attack on your homeworld. Zhe Young nodded in acknowledgement. We accept your apology, and we recognize the swift action taken by Admiral Daewon to apprehend the remaining hegemony forces. There is still the matter of the unauthorized attack on your Mars colony 20 years ago, Min continued. The Council proposes reparations and what happened 20 years ago cannot be undone. Zhe Young interrupted gently. We are more interested in preventing such events in the future. For all species. She activated a holographic display showing the Sol system, with Earth highlighted. Many of you have expressed concern about our defensive capabilities. Some fear we represent a new threat to sector stability. The display expanded to show neighboring star systems. We understand these concerns, but consider this. Despite possessing weapons that could have destroyed the hegemony fleet, we chose restraint. Despite suffering an unprovoked attack, we seek cooperation rather than retribution. Ambassador Su Min spoke up. Your approach to conflict is unexpected. Our military analysts are still studying your tactics. Zhe Young smiled slightly. We learned long ago that true victory isn't achieved through destruction, but through understanding. We fought amongst ourselves for millennia before realizing this simple truth. The display changed to show the disabled hegemony vessels being towed back to Coalition space. You are welcome to study our tactics, Zhe Young continued. But more valuable would be to study our history, to understand why we fight the way we do, why we choose to disable rather than destroy, why we seek to contain threats rather than eliminate them. As the diplomatic discussions continued, Yunji updated her analysis for the War College. Her conclusion was simple yet profound. Humans didn't just fight differently. They thought differently about fighting itself, and that difference might change the sector more profoundly than any weapon ever could. The Coalition Council chamber gleamed under soft blue lighting. After weeks of chaos and revelations, the Grand Hall had been restored to its usual pristine condition. Security was tighter than ever before, with guards from multiple species stationed at every entrance. The mood was solemn, with none of the usual pre-session chatter among the delegates. Every seat in the visitor gallery was filled. The events of recent weeks had shaken the Coalition to its core. The exposure of the hegemony, the failed attack on Earth, and the humans' unexpected restraint had become the only topic of conversation across 12 worlds. The chamber fell silent as the human delegation entered. Ambassador Zhe Young had been replaced by a senior diplomat named Hyun-Soo, a tall man with silver hair and a calm, measured stride. He was accompanied by a small team of advisors, including Captain Jinho, whose presence caused a stir among the military observers. Council Leader Min rose from the central podium, his formal robes shimmering with embedded light particles that signified a session of historic importance. Senior Diplomat Hyun-Soo, we welcome you and your delegation to this extraordinary session of the Coalition Council. Min began, his voice carrying easily through the perfect acoustics of the chamber. Before we begin formal proceedings, I must address the events that have transpired. Min's scales shifted to a deeper blue, a sign of deep regret in his species. The hegemony's actions were not sanctioned by the Coalition. Their attack on your Mars colony 2 decades ago, their continued raids on developing worlds, and their recent assault on Earth itself were all conducted without Council authorization or knowledge. The Council leader paused, seemingly struggling with his next words. Such open displays of emotion were rare among his kind. We offer formal apologies and reparations for the suffering caused by those who acted in our name without our consent. The chamber remained silent. Every delegate knew that such an apology was unprecedented in Coalition history. Hyun-Soo stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. Council Leader Min, delegates of the Coalition, on behalf of Earth and all human colonies, I accept your apology. A visible wave of relief passed through the assembly. However, Hyun-Soo continued, his voice taking on a firmer tone, the terms of our relationship must change. Recent events have exposed fundamental flaws in how the Coalition operates, flaws that allowed the hegemony to act unchecked for generations. He activated a small device, projecting a holographic map of the sector. Certain systems glowed red, the locations of confirmed hegemony operations. 47 worlds were targeted by the hegemony. 17 of these were Coalition members who lacked the political influence to have their concerns addressed. 30 were pre-spacefaring civilizations with no means to defend themselves. Murmurs spread through the chamber as delegates recognized their own worlds among those highlighted. Humanity has no desire for conquest or dominion, Hyun-Soo assured them. But we cannot stand by while developing species are exploited or endangered. Therefore, we propose the establishment of new protocols governing contact with pre-spacefaring civilizations. Over the next 3 hours, Hyun-Soo outlined a comprehensive plan for reform. His proposals were direct and occasionally blunt, challenging centuries of Coalition tradition. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others nodded in agreement. The following days saw intense negotiations. Coalition bureaucrats worked around the clock to draft new agreements. Military advisors studied the implications of human defensive technologies. Cultural experts scrambled to better understand these newcomers who had so quickly upset the established order. Most surprising to many was the flood of requests that arrived from worlds throughout the sector. Within days, representatives from 7 species previously subjugated by the hegemony had formally requested human protection. 3 of these weren't even aware of each other's existence before the crisis began. In a modest conference room far from the Grand Council chamber, Hyun-Soo met with these representatives. They were a diverse group, some barely spacefaring, others longtime Coalition members who had always been marginalized in council proceedings. We don't seek to create a rival power bloc, Hyun-Soo explained to them. But we do believe every species has the right to develop without interference or exploitation. Together, they drafted what became known as the Protected Worlds Accord, a framework guaranteeing development rights for pre-spacefaring species and mutual defense for vulnerable member worlds. Unlike Coalition agreements, which often ran to thousands of pages of legal text, the accord was remarkably straightforward. Just 12 principles written in clear, unambiguous language. On the observation deck of the diplomatic station, Ambassador Soo-min stood beside Admiral Daewon, watching Coalition engineers examine a small piece of human technology that had been offered as part of a cultural exchange. They've rewritten galactic politics in less than a cycle, Soo-min remarked, her voice a mixture of admiration and concern. No species has ever had such an immediate impact on Coalition governance. Daewon nodded thoughtfully, his gaze fixed on the human technician, patiently explaining some principle to the excited Coalition scientists. Perhaps we needed the disruption. We'd grown complacent, set in our ways. Does it concern you? Soo-min asked. Their military capabilities, I mean. Of course it does, Daewon admitted. But not in the way you might think. I'm not worried they'll attack us. I'm concerned about how dependent others might become on their protection. He gestured toward another viewport, where representatives of the newly formed Protected Worlds Accord were gathering for their first official meeting. Look at them. 7 species that barely acknowledged each other before now united under human guidance. It's not military power that makes humans dangerous. It's their ideas. Su-min considered this. You think their ideas are dangerous? I think they're transformative, Data One clarified. And transformation is always dangerous to established power structures. In another part of the station, Captain Jin-ho met with coalition military leaders for a candid exchange of perspectives. The meeting had been tense at first, with many officers still smarting from the ease with which the retribution had neutralized their ships. I want to address something directly, Jin-ho said after initial pleasantries were exchanged. Many of you see our technology as threatening. I understand that, but technology alone doesn't define military capability. Commander Sang-hyuk, still embarrassed by his failed boarding operation, spoke up. Your ships appeared out of nowhere. Your weapons disabled our most advanced vessels without causing damage. How should we interpret that except as a threat? Jin-ho smiled slightly. The same technology that allows our ships to appear out of nowhere also allows us to deliver medical supplies to disaster zones within minutes. The same energy systems that disabled your vessels also power cities on Earth without pollution. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Technology is neutral. It's how we choose to use it that matters. By the end of the meeting, several coalition officers had requested permission to visit Earth for further discussions. Jin-ho approved their requests on the spot, much to the surprise of the coalition protocol officers present. In the coalition archive, deep beneath the capital city, Chief Archivist Yoon sat alone at her terminal. Her task was simple yet profound. Update the official classification for humanity in the coalition database. Such classifications guided everything from diplomatic protocols to military response scenarios. She had reviewed all available data, the diplomatic reports, the military analyses, the cultural studies hastily compiled by coalition anthropologists. None seemed to capture the essence of these newcomers. After careful consideration, she entered. Approach with caution, masters of the unpredictable. Her finger hovered over the confirmation button. Was that fair? Was it accurate? It carried implications that might shape coalition human relations for generations. Yoon thought of everything she had learned about humans in recent weeks. Their remarkable technological innovations, their willingness to forgive the attack on their colony, their firm insistence on reform, their unpredictable tactics. She pressed confirm. The classification was entered into the official record, where it would guide coalition interactions with humanity for decades to come. The warning would echo across the stars for generations, not as a call for fear, but as a reminder that the galaxy had entered a new era. 3 months after the humans' arrival, the diplomatic station Vega 7 hosted a celebration marking the formal establishment of relations between Earth and the coalition. The Grand Hall was filled with representatives from dozens of worlds, including several pre-spacefaring species attending their first interstellar gathering. Ambassador Su-min found herself standing next to Captain Jin-ho, watching the diverse crowd with satisfaction. Did you expect this outcome when you first entered our space? She asked him. Jin-ho looked thoughtful. Not exactly this, but we hoped for understanding. And if understanding had not been possible, Jin-ho smiled. Then we would have tried harder. That's what humans do. Across the room, Admiral Day One raised a glass in a traditional coalition toast, to new beginnings. The assembled delegates repeated the phrase in dozens of languages, their voices blending into a harmonious chorus that seemed to resonate with possibility. Outside the station viewports, the stars shone steadily against the darkness. Somewhere among them, coalition vessels and human ships conducted joint exercises. On distant worlds, joint research teams explored new scientific frontiers. And in the formerly dangerous border regions, ships traveled safely under the protection of the new accords. The sector had indeed changed forever. But as Archivist Yoon had noted in her private journal, Perhaps this is not the chaos we feared, but the order we needed all along.